Have you ever believed that someone willing to spend $750,000 to hire hitmen and erase two human lives could ultimately hand himself a death sentence because of one unbelievably foolish and reckless act? This is not the plot of a Hollywood movie. It is the brutal reality behind a shocking tragedy that once left American investigators stunned. A seemingly perfect murder, carried out by highly skilled former special operators, was ultimately exposed because of one absurd detail that no one could have expected. Hello everyone, and welcome to the channel. If you enjoy gripping and authentic true crime cases and want to explore the darkest corners of the criminal mind, please hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications. Your support is our greatest motivation to keep digging deeper and bringing you more high-quality videos. Everything began on a foggy morning on March 12, 2020, in the quiet outskirts of Nashville, Tennessee. A construction worker was walking along a deserted road when he suddenly stopped in front of a white 2005 Acura sedan. The vehicle was parked at an awkward angle, partially hidden behind thick bushes near a large tree. At first, the worker thought he was simply looking at an ordinary traffic accident. But as he stepped closer and looked through the dusty windows, his entire body went cold. In the back seat, two people were slumped against each other in a completely unnatural position. Dark, dried blood surrounded gunshot wounds to vital areas of their bodies. The victims were quickly identified as 33-year-old Holly Williams, a beautiful and talented salon owner, and 36-year-old William Bill Lanway, her complicated former boyfriend. The scene, with the Acura crashed into a tree, appeared to have been deliberately staged to steer investigators toward the conclusion that this was a traffic accident. But one disturbing inconsistency after another soon emerged. There were no identification documents, wallets, or cell phones left inside the vehicle. Every trace of the victim's personal belongings had been removed. At first, police considered the possibility of a tragic murder-suicide driven by a toxic relationship, that Bill Lanway had killed his former girlfriend before taking his own life. That theory appeared even more plausible as investigators began uncovering Bill's deeply troubled past. Bill was a man whose life had been scarred by devastating psychological trauma. At just 3.5 years old, he witnessed his own father murder his mother right in front of him. Then, after becoming an adult and starting a family of his own, Bill suffered another unimaginable tragedy when his 3-year-old daughter died of brain cancer. One devastating loss after another pushed Bill into severe depression. He hid his inner rage and emotional turmoil behind a quiet exterior. But when he entered into a relationship with Holly, a darker side of him began to emerge, one marked by manipulation and violence. Whenever Holly became determined to pack her belongings and leave, Bill would use the tragedy of losing his daughter to manipulate her sympathy and pressure her into coming back. The threats reached a horrifying peak when Holly came home from work and discovered that her healthy, beloved pet dog had been killed inside the house. Terrified, she went to court and successfully obtained a restraining order against him. But tragically, just 1 week after that protective order took effect, Holly and Bill were both found dead inside that same Acura. However, the murder-suicide theory quickly began to collapse under forensic scrutiny. The murder weapon was nowhere to be found at the scene. More importantly, the autopsy results showed that the bullet trajectory and the location of Bill's wound made it impossible for him to have shot himself. The killings had been carried out with such coldness, precision, and efficiency that investigators began to suspect the involvement of highly experienced killers with an exceptional knowledge of firearms. So what could have pushed a 33-year-old salon owner and her 36-year-old former boyfriend into the crosshairs of cold-blooded killers? Was their toxic relationship really the only motive behind their deaths? Or was there another, far more terrifying secret hidden in the darkness? What do you think about the suspiciously staged car scene? A. Was this the reckless and impulsive act of a jealous, unstable person trying to cover up a crime? B. Or was it part of a cold, carefully calculated plan orchestrated by a ruthless force operating in the shadows? Leave your answer, A or B, in the comments below, and let's discuss it together. As the shadow of suspicion began to settle over the crime scene inside the Acura, investigators realized they were no longer dealing with an ordinary murder case. They were facing a maze carefully constructed by people who knew exactly what they were doing. In their search for clues, police immediately went to the home of Holly Williams and Bill Lanway. The first strange discovery was almost eerie. The keys, wallets, identification documents, and even the cell phones belonging to both Holly and Bill were still neatly sitting on the dining table. There was no sign that either of them had prepared to leave for a trip. No luggage, no farewell note. It suggested that Holly and Bill had been taken suddenly and against their will, without any real opportunity to resist. The door to that house may have remained closed, but what investigators found inside opened the door to a far darker journey, one that would slowly uncover the horrifying secrets both victims had tried to bury while they were still alive. By tracing the digital evidence left behind on their electronic devices, investigators collected and analyzed their text messages and call histories. Among thousands of private messages, one unusual detail emerged like a faint light in the darkness. The same anonymous phone number appeared on both Holly's and Bill's devices. It was not connected to any traditional cellular provider. Instead, it had been created through an online service designed to conceal a user's identity, the kind of tool often favored by people attempting to erase their digital footprints. Recognizing the sophistication and potential importance of this lead, local authorities immediately requested emergency assistance from the FBI's Digital Crimes Unit. While waiting for the FBI's technical analysis, investigators began reviewing every piece of footage captured by the security cameras installed around Holly's home. Black and white recordings from the days before the murders revealed a scene that could send chills down anyone's spine. In the darkness of the night, three tall men entered Holly's property. They were dressed in tight-fitting black clothing, their faces completely concealed. Their movements and body language suggested a level of discipline and training that immediately set them apart from ordinary criminals. They showed none of the panic or hurried behavior of common burglars. Instead, they moved slowly and methodically, carefully observing every corner of the property and examining possible entrances and exits as though they were conducting a reconnaissance operation, studying the layout of the house before carrying out something far more serious. The home contained valuable possessions, including expensive jewelry and cash. But the men ignored all of it. Their only apparent objective was to study the space. Then, after noticing a security camera pointed in their direction, one of the men calmly approached it, disabled the device with practiced efficiency, and silently disappeared back into the darkness. When Holly returned home that evening and discovered the suspicious signs around the property, as well as the disabled security camera, she was overwhelmed with fear. That night, she barricaded the doors and remained awake, terrified of what might happen next. The following morning, Holly urgently called a locksmith and had every lock in the house replaced. She understood that some dark and unknown force might be watching her, but she could never have imagined that even reinforced locks would offer little protection against an assassination plan that had already been carefully set in motion. The investigation's biggest breakthrough finally came from the FBI. Using advanced technical methods, the Digital Crimes Unit managed to penetrate the security surrounding the anonymous phone number. The identity behind the virtual number was revealed. His name was Adam Carey, a 30-year-old man living in North Carolina. When investigators pulled up Carey's background, they were stunned. Carey was not an ordinary street criminal or a typical violent offender. He was a military veteran who had previously served in an elite U.S. Special Operations Unit, possessing advanced skills in combat, survival, and counter-surveillance. At the time of the murders, Carey was working for a private security company. Investigators then compared facial biometric data from Holly's security footage with Carey's existing records. The result was a match. The man who had entered Holly's property that night was the former Special Operations serviceman himself. As police dug deeper into Adam Carey's past, they discovered that he had previously been arrested for impersonating a police officer. But an even more disturbing discovery emerged from an earlier search of his home. Authorities had reportedly seized an alarming collection of military-style weapons and equipment, including firearms fitted with suppressors, specialized optical sights, components capable of being used to manufacture explosives, and flash grenades. This was not the kind of arsenal one would expect to find in the home of an ordinary citizen. The fact that someone connected to such a cache of weapons had previously received only a 4-month prison sentence raised even more troubling questions among investigators about who Carey might have been connected to, or whether powerful individuals or organizations could have been protecting him. At this point, the picture surrounding the murders began to grow far darker and more complicated. Police continued examining the victims' social circles and communication records. And that was when the hidden life of Holly Williams finally began to come into the light, shattering the image of her as simply a successful salon owner. Behind the public image of a successful entrepreneur in the beauty industry, Holly Williams had been living a far more dangerous double life. From the age of 18, Holly had entered the underground world as a high-end escort, catering to wealthy and influential clients. Using the professional name Layla Love, she maintained extremely high rates, allowing her to filter out ordinary customers and interact almost exclusively with people who possessed wealth, power, or influence. Her services ranged from accompanying wealthy clients to private parties and exclusive events to more intimate personal encounters. The underground profession brought Holly a substantial amount of money in a relatively short period of time. Her beauty salon in Murfreesboro, however, also provided her with a legitimate public identity and a carefully constructed social image among her family and friends. Holly had never hidden this part of her life from Bill Lanway, and Bill's awareness of, and involvement in, her world would eventually make him another dangerous link in an increasingly complicated chain of relationships. Among the many wealthy clients who sought out Layla Love, investigators became particularly interested in one name, Eric Charles Mond. At 47 years old, Eric Mond was a highly powerful businessman from Texas who owned a successful chain of automobile dealerships in the Austin area. To the public and the business community, Mond appeared to embody success. He was seen as a talented executive, a devoted father, a loving husband, and a well-known philanthropist within his community. But behind that respectable public image was another life. Mond had allegedly made secret trips to Nashville under the pretext of visiting his son, who was attending college. Away from his family, the Texas millionaire entered into expensive private encounters with Layla Love. In early February 2020, Eric Mond allegedly used an anonymous email account and a false name to contact Holly and arrange a meeting with her at an upscale bar in Nashville. That meeting unfolded amid strong drinks and promises. What Mond could never have imagined was that his fateful encounter with Layla Love at that bar would ignite a devastating chain of events, one that would eventually pull everyone involved into a spiral of crime, threats, and life sentences from which there would be no return. As the veil of secrecy surrounding the illicit relationship between millionaire Eric Mond and salon owner Holly Williams began to show its first cracks, the real tragedy was finally set in motion. On March 1, 2020, the sound of a ringing phone shattered the peaceful atmosphere inside Eric Mond's luxurious mansion in Texas. A message from an anonymous number appeared on the screen. Its contents were brief, but chilling enough to send a cold shiver through his entire body. Transfer $25,000 immediately, or all the photographs, messages, and evidence of your secret affair with Holly Williams will be sent directly to your wife. For a businessman like Eric Mond, who owned a massive automobile dealership empire in Texas, $25,000 was hardly a significant amount of money. But what terrified him and drove him into a state of panic was not the financial loss. It was the possible collapse of an empire of wealth, status, and reputation that he had spent his entire life building. A messy and highly publicized divorce would not only destroy his carefully crafted image as a devoted family man and a respected businessman, but could also cost him tens of millions of dollars in bitter legal disputes. The arrogance and pride of a millionaire accustomed to living at the top of society would not allow him to become a victim controlled by someone else. Overwhelmed by panic and terrified of being exposed, Eric Mond chose to walk down a far darker and more ruthless path. Instead of seeking the protection of law enforcement, he urgently contacted Gilad Peled, a former Israeli military officer who was now the owner of Spear Investigative Support, a private security company based in Texas. Peled had previously helped Mond deal with sensitive problems involving his automobile dealerships, and his company was also where former Special Operations serviceman Adam Carey worked. After receiving the urgent request, along with the promise of a substantial payment from his millionaire client, Peled immediately assigned Adam Carey and Brian Brockway, a former U.S. Marine with extensive battlefield experience, to the operation. Using surveillance techniques, advanced digital tracking, and telecommunications data analysis, the team quickly dug into the victims' private lives and uncovered a bitter truth. Holly Williams was completely innocent. She had absolutely no knowledge of the blackmail scheme, nor had she ever intended to use the secret relationship to destroy Eric Mond. The real mastermind behind the extortion was William Bill Lanway. After accidentally discovering private messages and the secret relationship between his former girlfriend and the Texas millionaire, Bill, driven by recklessness, financial desperation, and psychological instability, shaped by the tragedies of his past, decided to turn that secret into a gold mine. The situation spiraled out of control on March 11, 2020. In a moment of reckless impulsiveness, Bill used his phone to call Eric Mond directly on his private number. When the phone suddenly began ringing inside Mond's Texas home while his wife was in the next room, the millionaire was thrown into a state of absolute panic. He felt as though a noose was tightening around his neck. The line between his peaceful, luxurious life and total destruction had suddenly become a matter of seconds. And it was in that dark and panicked moment that Gilad Peled allegedly proposed a solution so cold and ruthless that it was almost unimaginable. Eliminate the source of the problem completely. The plan would not stop with silencing Bill Lanway, the alleged blackmailer. Peled also allegedly persuaded Mond that Holly Williams had to die as well. In the eyes of those behind the plot, Holly was seen as the source of the entire disaster, a living witness who knew about the connection between Mond and Bill. They believed that only her death could guarantee the millionaire's permanent safety. Faced with a choice between morality, human life, and his own reputation, Eric Mond allegedly gave his approval. A $750,000 murder-for-hire plot was officially set in motion. Before the sun had even risen on the morning of March 12, 2020, Adam Carey and Brian Brockway were allegedly waiting outside Holly's home in Nashville. Thanks to the reconnaissance conducted during their earlier intrusion, they allegedly knew the victim's movements in detail. When Holly and Bill stepped outside and prepared to get into the white Acura, the two armed men allegedly moved in, restrained them, and completely stripped them of any chance to fight back. They then allegedly transported Holly and Bill to a remote and deserted construction site near Old Hickory Boulevard. There, the coldness and brutality of men with professional military training were allegedly revealed in their most horrifying form. Despite the victims' desperate pleas, Carey and Brockway allegedly killed both of them at close range with precise gunshots to vital areas. After taking their lives, the two men allegedly placed the bodies in the back seat of the Acura. They then drove the vehicle to a wooded roadside area and pushed it down an embankment in an attempt to stage the scene as nothing more than an ordinary traffic accident. For hours afterward, the two alleged hitmen systematically worked to erase every trace of what they had done. They gathered the victims' belongings, wallets, and cell phones for disposal. They allegedly wiped the vehicle clean of biological evidence and fingerprints, returned the rental vehicle they had used during the surveillance operation, and quietly left Nashville. They walked away convinced that they had carefully constructed the perfect crime and that police would soon close the case as either an accident or a murder-suicide caused by a toxic relationship. But as the old saying goes, justice may be slow, but it is difficult to escape. The arrogance of wealth and the belief that money could buy perfection created a digital vulnerability that no one could have anticipated. Just days after the two bodies were discovered, Eric Mond, apparently relieved because he believed the greatest problem of his life had finally been solved, allegedly did something so bizarre that it would later prove devastating. He visited a public online review website and left an enthusiastic 5-star review. He publicly praised Peled's security company for its absolute professionalism, outstanding crisis management abilities, and complete satisfaction with the results. That astonishingly careless review became an invisible but powerful digital thread connecting the millionaire directly to the security company, and ultimately to the two alleged hitmen. As the FBI and Nashville law enforcement gathered financial evidence and digital records, they moved to arrest Gilad Peled. Facing the possibility of spending the rest of his life behind bars, Peled quickly broke down and agreed to cooperate with investigators in hopes of receiving a reduced sentence. Under police supervision, Peled then placed a controlled and recorded phone call to Eric Mond. During the conversation, Peled fabricated a story claiming that one member of the hit team had become frightened, was demanding additional money, and was threatening to reveal the entire operation to law enforcement. Without hesitation, fear, or resistance, Eric Mond allegedly agreed to provide more money. He then calmly instructed Peled to deal with that hitman the same way Holly and Bill were dealt with. The chilling lack of emotion in the millionaire's voice during that recorded conversation destroyed any attempt to argue that he had merely wanted someone to threaten or negotiate with the victims. On December 10, 2021, Eric Mond was officially arrested at the headquarters of his business empire, shocking his colleagues and family. Banking records obtained by financial investigators reportedly revealed a series of payments totaling $750,000, divided into smaller transfers and made before and after the murders. In November 2023, a 2-week trial in Nashville brought the full scope of the horrifying crime into the light. Faced with powerful financial evidence, telecommunications data, and detailed testimony from those involved, the jury deliberated for just 7 hours before reaching its final verdict. All 4 men, Eric Mond, the alleged mastermind, Gilad Peled, the organizer, and the 2 alleged hitmen who allegedly carried out the killings, Adam Carey and Brian Brockway, were sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. In the end, the arrogance of wealth, secret desires hidden in the darkness, and a ruthless disregard for human life came at an extraordinary price. The man who was willing to spend $750,000 to buy peace and protect his reputation ultimately traded away everything. In trying to bury the truth forever, he instead condemned himself to spend the rest of his life behind prison bars.